In late summer 1944, Bill Scroggins, a student attending SMU's School of Theology, was appointed by the district superintendent to begin to survey the area east of Love Field to see if the time was right to organize a Methodist church in that part of Dallas. And on October 4th, 1944, a small group gathered at the home of William Earl Norris at 4711 West Lovers Lane to make plans to organize a new church called Lovers Lane Methodist Church. The church was formally organized on Friday evening, November 17, 1944, by a quarterly conference at the Norris home. On the last day of January 1945, a vacant home at 3924 Parkside was rented for $65 a month as a temporary home for services until the building committee and board of stewards could raise enough money to build something more permanent on Lovers Lane. The first service was held there on February 4, 1945. Plans, architect drawings, budgets, and fundraising efforts began to come together for what would be the church buildings on Lovers Lane. However, fundraising efforts fell short of the amount needed, so the Board of Stewards turned to Marshall Steele, senior pastor at Highland Park Methodist Church, for help. Dr. Steele and Highland Park Methodist Church agreed to help, pledging $500 a year for 5 years to be applied to the principal of a loan Dr. Steele helped them obtain. Highland Park also agreed to pay $1,800 a year toward the Lovers Lane pastor's salary until the church could assume that responsibility. But there was a catch. All this was contingent on Lovers Lane having a full-time pastor. Bill Scroggins had not yet completed his theology school studies, so he could only be a part-time pastor. So, Lovers Lane asked Dr. Steele if he had anyone in mind. Dr. Steele replied, "We have an up-and-coming young minister on our staff who wants a church of his own. He is awfully good with young couples, and I think he would be a good man for you. His name is Tom Shipp." After much discussion, Lovers Lane voted to bring on Tom Shipp. On October 28, 1945, Bishop Charles C. Seligman assigned Thomas Joel Shipp as full-time pastor at Lovers Lane Methodist Church. The initial step in the master plan called for the construction of a chapel, and construction of it was moving forward during the summer of 1946, and on Sunday, October 20, 1946, the first service was held in the chapel at 5002 West Lovers Lane. Temporary buildings were added for Sunday school classes, and in January of 1949, plans began to come together for the second major step in the master plan, an interim sanctuary that would eventually become a 2-story educational building after the permanent sanctuary was built. Fundraising began with a building campaign for the new structures, and the first services were held in the new interim sanctuary on March 8, 1953. But the church soon outgrew the existing facilities, and plans were made to build a new permanent sanctuary. Construction costs were estimated to be $500,000, which included the new sanctuary, a fellowship hall, and funds to convert the existing temporary sanctuary into an education building. On March 2, 1958, the congregation occupied the new permanent sanctuary at 5002 West Lovers Lane with a seating capacity of 1,100. But by May 1959, concerns began to develop about whether the present site would be sufficient to serve the church in the future, and by the start of 1960, Lovers Lane was beginning to look at alternative sites. On April 19, 1960, W.O. Bankston and Tom Shipp flew to Albuquerque to meet with Billy Binion, who owned 6.6 acres on Northwest Highway. Mr. Binion lived in Las Vegas. Tom would not go to Las Vegas, and Mr. Binion would not come to Dallas, so they met in Albuquerque. Tom and W.O. Bankston put down $10 and signed a contract to purchase the property for $135,000. In 1959, Reverend Kenan Callahan became an assistant pastor, and by 1960, he began to play an important role with the planning committee for the new site on Northwest Highway. Ken was instrumental in much of the research and study that was undertaken in the planning process, and on April 16, 1962, Ken was part of a small team that presented recommendations and illustrations of what the church might look like in its new location. The plan to relocate was approved at that meeting, and at a called session of the quarterly conference on February 11, 1963, the plan to move was approved. Planning began for the new location. Through lots of starts and stops in the planning process, some reconsiderations, several votes, on February 25, 1970, the contract to build the first phase of the new site was approved, and the groundbreaking took place on March 15, 1970. The first phase included Asbury Hall as a fellowship hall that would serve as the sanctuary until the permanent sanctuary was built. Asbury Hall had seating for 1,150 movable chairs. The first services of worship were held in Asbury Hall on Sunday morning, August 8, 1971 at 9:30 and 11 o'clock a.m. The first phase included 3 educational buildings with Epworth Hall serving as the main entrance. And the first phase included Oxford Hall and Wesley Chapel. Wesley Chapel had pews that would seat a little more than 100 people. The permanent sanctuary was not to be constructed until 1979. The new sanctuary was named the Pollard and Sharon Simons Sanctuary. Pollard Simon, a man of Jewish faith, contributed $1.5 million towards the construction cost of just over $3 million. The first service in the new sanctuary was held on January 14, 1979. The Center for Spiritual Development across Northwest Highway was purchased in 1984, and the Meadowbrook parking property was purchased in 1991, with the walking bridge completed in 2001. The Christ Family Center groundbreaking was held in June 2000 and dedicated on August 19, 2001, along with Benton Garden. Ship Chapel was consecrated on December 6, 2009, and the chapel organ was consecrated in 2011. And Aldersgate Hall and Watson Hall were completed in December of 2009. Shepherd's Garden and the Columbarium were opened September 25, 2013. And finally, Serenity House, now called the Copeland House, opened in October 2013. And the future holds much more promise of gifts of God for Lovers Lane United Methodist Church. Let's welcome Senior Pastor Stan Copeland to introduce Dr. Kenan Callahan, who will share some thoughts on Lovers Lane's future gifts of God.